Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel, right? And not too long ago I uploaded basically a refreshed version, 2021 version of best champions for Labyrinth of Legends, and I mentioned a lot of reasons why. But also after that video, many of you have been asking me to do a follow-up on Labyrinth of Legends and go over the hardest fights and suggest best counters and point out things that everybody should be kind of like wary and careful about. So we're going to use this picture. I will leave a link to this image in the video description below that you can refer to yourselves in your free time. But the reason we are using this picture is, well, quite simple. We can zoom in and at that point we can find all of the abilities of Labyrinth of Legends. I'm going to zoom in a bit further. It's clear enough. And yeah, the basic disclaimer is 1.5 million health pools to 3.3 million. I'm sure everybody knows that. The fact you can get ambushed there as well. Now we can take a look at the abilities of these so-called enigmatic abilities of Labyrinth of Legends champions and which fights you need to be aware of. So against Abomination, the thing that you need to know is basically he has extra poison. So quite needless to say, you do need a poison immune champion or a pseudo poison immune champion such as Ghost in order to be able to deal with Abomination. Other than that, it's fairly free for all, so it's not too bad. There are no other extra nodes or requirements. Now, Agent Venom is notoriously one of the harder fights in Labyrinth of Legends, but the difficulty level of this fight has dropped drastically. Now, the reason why it used to be so hard when it came out was that you didn't only have to deal with Tenacity, you also had to deal with Incinerate. And at the time Agent Venom and Labyrinth came out, there were like two Incinerate immune champions, and neither of them were good for Labyrinth because they dealt hardly any damage. So even though technically you can use pretty much any champion to deal with Agent Venom, and you can even solo the guy with a lot of different options, those people who were extremely skilled at the game back in the day even managed to solo this guy with like a rank 4 Star-Lord, which was incredibly hard. On the contrary, there were people who brought in rank 4 Star-Lord and ended up spending like 1,000, 2,000 units on this guy. So, to make it easy on yourself, definitely bring in a champion that can at the very least deal with that Incinerate and you don't have to stress about it too much. Now, after that, if you have ability to deal with his Tenacity and find easier openings, that's also helpful. But honestly, if you don't have to worry about that Incinerate consistently triggering and destroying your health, it's not all that bad. So what are the best options here? Apocalypse is actually pretty much a wonderful option because you do not only get class advantage, you do not only eventually go Incinerate immune, but also you do not have to worry about Tenacity. Colossus is a great option for this fight because Colossus is Incinerate immune. Ghost obviously is fantastic, so is Aegon, because Aegon can shrug off all of those Incinerates. So yeah, this is a fight to be well aware of, and this is a fight to kind of like keep an eye out for. But luckily, many of the best Labyrinth options are perfectly capable of dealing with this fight. Also, the further I'm going to go and explain the abilities here, I want to point out that there's only one champion in the game who is great answer for all of the fights in Labyrinth, which is Aegon. Now, all the other great options have at the very least a couple or a handful of fights you don't want to use them against. For instance, Colossus, you probably don't want to bring him in against Abomination, even though there is a possible way how you can get away with it using Professor X setup. Still not ideal. But Colossus also wouldn't be perfect against Doctor Strange, at the very least without White Magneto's energy. But we're gonna get there in a bit. Black Panther Civil War, honestly, it's pretty much nothing. He cycled these physical and energy resistance buffs, and I'm quite sure this has been actually bugged for a really long time, so something's still happening in that fight, but nothing of real value, and the worst case, he has some damage mitigation and the fight will go longer, but Black Panther's health pool isn't overly high either. Then we have Black Widow, and Black Widow is a fairly tricky fight, but it's also perfectly doable with any and all champions for the most part. Now, what makes Black Widow fight tricky is that basically you can't punish her special attacks. except you can't punish level 2 because there is a small window of opportunity where you can still see that timer is about to expire before she fully recovers. You can still land a hit, but that takes quite a bit of practice. Ideally, you just do not want to hit her after she throws special attacks until a timer expires. And then obviously she does have the magical 3% away chance, which is always very funny. And with that, ideally, you basically just want an away counter. If you have a champion that gives you alternate way of finding openings, such as Aegon by going unblockable, or such as Ghost by phasing, you get a much easier time. But in general, you can use any champion that you want. Also, a quick note as we are going further. None of these champions, if they have been buffed since, have the new buffed abilities. For instance, Daredevil Hell's Kitchen does not shrug off debuffs. For instance, Colossus is the old crappy version, so on and so forth. So whenever a champion gets buffed, their buffs do not translate into Abyss, into Realm of Legends, and into Labyrinth of Legends. So a lot of these champions are actually different from how they are in the game, including Colossus in this case. And Colossus does not have the new ability set. And Colossus in general is very, very straightforward opponent. Just do not throw special attack in his block, and that's it. Him being able to evade can catch you off guard. I have died with a bunch of champions to Colossus because of that. So ideally, you either want to spam level 3s, or you want to be able to prevent evade, or you want to have your special attacks unblockable because those cannot be blocked. Other than that, super straightforward fight. Now, Cyclops' blue team was kind of like notorious for a while as one of the hardest fights, and it's because you need to deal with him unblockable a lot. Upon reaching 1 bar of power, Cyclops becomes unblockable until he attacks his opponent or reaches 2 bars of power. So that's straightforward. Whenever you push him past a single bar of power, he's going to go unblockable, so you can't parry, and he can catch you off guard. But it's, again, more of a test to your skill than your roster, and you can literally use any champion here. You just need to be aware that he's going to be unblockable in between 1 to 2 bars of power. That's it. As I said before, Daredevil Hell's Kitchen does not have the new ability set, and while the opponents of Daredevil are blocking, they take degeneration damage every second, equal to percentage of their health lost. Daredevil is actually a very, very simple opponent. You can still parry, and it's not going to register as like degeneration. It only starts degenerating you somewhat slightly when you're holding block, so parry is perfectly legit, and Daredevil does not have the new ability set, therefore you can use, again, pretty much whoever you want. He will have the new animations though, so be aware of that. Whenever they change the champion animations, those do translate into the old content, even though abilities don't. So he will have the long, stupid, silly level 1, but he can't shrug off your debuffs and you can find your openings fairly easily. But Doctor Strange, now Doctor Strange is actually very annoying opponent, because when blocked, Doctor Strange deals 5% of power from his opponent's buff durations increased by 100%. The fact that his buff durations increased by 100% pretty much means that he will at all times have 2 of his blessings active. Also, whenever you do parry, he's going to steal your power. Whenever you take his special attack on block, he's going to steal your power, and his special attacks are not the most straightforward or easiest to deal with. So ideally, you do want champions that, well, first and foremost, do not rely on buffs, because Doctor Strange is going to nullify all of them, and you want champions that can find alternate openings. Now, you can solo this fight with a bunch of different champions, including a vanilla option like Star-Lord, but you definitely cannot use any champions that do rely on a lot of buffs, because he's going to nullify all of them. The fight itself can be quite tricky with his passive power gain. If he doesn't want to throw a special attack, you might end up eating a level 3, or you might find yourself in a very annoying cycle where he just keeps throwing level 1s, and if he hits your block, he gets past another bar of power, so on and so forth. Now, Aegon works for this guy perfectly fine. I think possibly Colossus might work if you're using the White Magneto synergy to kind of like somewhat protect him against Nullify. It's still not going to be perfect. I have one-shot this fight with Ghost in the past. Ghost works well enough as well, even though you can't gain the cruelty buffs. Still, you find the easy openings and you can be very, very aggressive due to the fact that he doesn't gain power in normal ways. But ideally, you do want your champion to have some sort of power control element that prevents him from gaining power and dropping level 3s on your face. So this is also one of those fights that you should be aware of, considering that you end up taking this guy at the very least, I believe, twice. Now, Electro is just Electro. His enhanced ability is more static shock damage. So any champion that works against Electro normally works against Electro in Labyrinth Legends. So you can use Gwenpool is one of the OG old options. Aegon can actually one-shot this guy as well if you start the fight with like above 500 combo meter, because then you reduce opponent's ability accuracy on crits. Then who else can work for this fight? Let's quickly think about it. Gambit, why not? Sure. Daredevil Hell's Kitchen should work. Namor will work for this fight. As I said, Gwenpool before will work. I have quaked this guy in past. But yeah, you just need to make sure that you're using a champion that does not take Electro's damage back. And yeah, let's move on to Groot. Groot is straightforward. There's absolutely nothing about him. One regeneration buffs, but yeah. That's about it. Groot begins regeneration upon enemy's activation of their regeneration buff. So don't regen in Groot's fight. It's very simple, straightforward fight. Groot still stinks in here. Guillotine is the node that has bleed on. So you do need either ability to deal with a bleed debuff or bleed immunity when you go in this fight. And that is about it. So basically, the fight itself is very easy, very straightforward. But you just need either Ghost or bleed immune champion, and other than that you're good. But it is something that you need to plan for. Hulkbuster. Now with Hulkbuster, again, keep in mind he does not have buffed power set, so you don't have to worry about getting shocked whilst you're striking him. And the only ability that Hulkbuster really has here is that you can't hit his block. Every time you hit his block, he's going to reflect the damage to you, and that number is going to double. So initially, first couple of hits, you don't take too much damage back, but if you keep hitting his block, you're going to take a ton of damage back. So that's it. Just block bait heavy attacks if you can't find an opening, and that is fairly straightforward fight. Nothing to worry about there. Now, Juggernaut was one of the most annoying fights in Labyrinth Legends initially, because his unstoppable basically goes permanent until you land a heavy attack. But keep in mind that he still has his temporary unstoppable, kind of like that you still have to wait out. So it's a fairly tricky fight. Ideally, you want just a slow opponent here, like She-Hulk would Spider-Gwen, I don't know, Red Guardian, whoever. Actually, Red Guardian's not great for Labyrinth, but She-Hulk, Spider-Gwen, Stealth Suit Spidey would absolutely destroy these guys. But yes, you can also get by this fight with Aegon and his huge damage output, or you can use other options. It's just the fight is not going to be as great as perfect, because yes, you do need to land those heavy attacks on Juggernaut. So at the very bare minimum, you need to make sure that whoever you plan to use for this guy can punish Juggernaut's heavy attack with a heavy attack of your own, and that's about it. Now, Maestro, I'm going to cover that in the end. Magneto, again, is pre-buff version. However, his magnetize ability is kind of like amped up to the max, and basically no metal champions. That's it. Because if you bring in a metal champion, you're going to start the fight stunned for 5 seconds, and you are very possibly going to be dead at the end of those 5 seconds, and you will have 0 ability accuracy. So anybody that's not metal works. Moon Knight, it's kind of fine. It's actually can be helpful. If you get hit by his special attack, or you take his special in the block, you get placed a degen on you up until 4 stacks of that degen. But whenever you land your special attack, for each hit, you remove a stack of degen. If you have willpower, you can actually end up healing with a single stack of that degen, but basically just evade his special attacks or bring in a champion that spams special attacks. Mostly keep in mind Moon Knight can evade in certain phases, so ideally deal with him in a phase where Moon Knight can't evade. Miss Marvel does basically nothing. She shrugs off debuffs. Well, okay, it's not basically nothing, but she shrugs off debuffs and converts them into fury stacks. So you can't use a champion that relies on debuffs in order to deal damage. Other than that, it's Kamal Khan, pure poundage. Rhino is a typical Rhino, and that node is broken, I believe. Or at the very least, whenever you crit, you kind of ignore physical resistance, and it really doesn't matter all that much. The only thing here is that he doesn't take damage from physical-based special 1 and 2 attacks, but I'm quite sure it's actually broken or something that didn't work fine. But yeah, he's basically a tanky Rhino. Ideally, use energy damage champion, you're going to be fine. Now we have Rocket Raccoon. Don't push him to 2 bars of power, otherwise he's going to go unblockable. That's it. Literally the end of the story. Never push him to 2 bars of power, you're good. Spider-Man. Spider-Man starts with 100% chance to evade passive. This is removed whenever he becomes stunned. The evade passive returns if Spider-Man activates his special 2. So again, do not push him to level 2, or if you do push him to level 2, just parry him afterwards. But even though you deal with his 100% evade passive, he still has his original innate evade abilities. So ideally, you do want an evade counter. You want to bring in like Nick Fury, or you want to bring in Slow Champion, or True Strike, True Accuracy Champion, A-Gun, or whoever. So you definitely want an ability to deal with the evade. Miles Morales lose all. But yeah, Miles Morales, I believe, is also bugged in Labyrinth. I wonder if you're noticing a trend here. Lose all his charges of evasion. He gains Fury, Cruelty, Precision, and Resistances. Those enhancements are removed when his opponent activates Special 1 or 2. When he loses his evade charges, he gets some buffs, but I think it's busted. Other than that, it's just Miles, and there's nothing special you should know about that fight. Star-Lord literally doesn't matter. It's everybody's punching bag. Thor. Now, Thor is quite interesting. When attacked, he has a 5% chance to apply stun timer, passive, kind of like stack, up to 3 of those. And then they last 30 seconds. If they expire, you get stunned. However, you can remove them with heavy attack. So it's a very straightforward fight, but you need to be able to land your heavy attacks in the middle of the fight. And again, ideally, the kind of like base minimum requirement here should be that you check whether you can punish his heavy attack with a heavy attack of your own. It honestly isn't that bad, it isn't too intrusive. And Thor Jane Foster, when blocking an attack, Thor stacks shocks opponent for quite a bit, so bring in shock immune and you're going to be good, or bring in somebody who's pseudo shock immune, or bring in somebody who can shrug off debuffs like A-Gun, or find alternate openings. Other than that, this fight is fairly straightforward. Against Ultron, just do not use energy-based damage champions. Or I suppose you can technically use Magneto, because he reverses the healing there. Magneto would probably just destroy this guy. And he takes no damage from energy-based special 1 and 2 attacks. So yeah, it's kind of opposite of Rhino. You want physical damage. Obviously, Ultron does have that pesky evade that you also need to be aware of. So ideally, you do want some help dealing with opponent's evade. Venompool is basically a debuff immune champion. But whenever we're talking about debuff immunity in Labyrinth, it's very, very interesting to note that debuffs that didn't exist at the time Labyrinth was released do not get shrugged off by most of these champions. So for instance, Venompool cannot shrug off Disorient debuff. I believe he cannot shrug off Incinerate debuff. Definitely can't shrug off Rapture debuff. And a whole bunch of newer debuffs cannot be shrugged off by Venompool or Kamal Khan. It's kind of tricky to know, but that's just a weird place that Labyrinth is. Vision is very easy if you understand what you're doing against him. Basically, whenever you dash back, you lose 5% of your power. If you reach 0 power, you become stunned for 1 second, and Vision just smacks you in the face. And he has unblockable special 2, and in Labyrinth, Vision and Vision Age of Ultron specials actually deal damage even if they hit you in a block. But yeah, so ideally you want to start the fight with a parry, and you just want to be very, very, very careful how and when you use special attacks. That's quite about it. The tricky bit there is because you also don't want Vision to reach 3 bars of power through his synthesis, so you never really want to push Vision past 1 and a teeny tiny weeny bit of power, because if you push him like to a power bar and a half, whenever synthesis does trigger, if it is not bugged, because every other fight it doesn't actually work, yeah, he's gonna get level 3 and you're gonna get smacked. So the main thing here is just be careful with your power meter. Wolverine X23 used to be one of the most notorious fights in Labyrinth because of that insane heal. And this was one of those fights where you couldn't just quote-unquote chip away. It was either you are able to deal with that fight or not. And a lot of people have gotten stuck in the past. But obviously since then we have had a ton of options that let us deal with regeneration. You can also out-damage that regeneration with like Colossus, for instance, I don't know, or even a jacked up Starlord. But Aegon, for instance, also is a very viable option because Aegon reduces opponent's defensive ability accuracy on crits, so she hardly ever triggers her natural regen, and you only need to contend with this Labyrinth of Legends regen. So Aegon is perfectly capable of out-damaging it. Guillotine 2099 can out-damage it. Or you can bring in a specific champion in order to deal with the regen, like Void, who can reverse the regeneration and just solo this fight very easily. Or you can bring in Warlock, who shuts down regens and stuff like that. So there are a ton of options now. At the very worst case, bring in a champion that deals a ton of debuffs and max out Despair. But yeah, a lot of different options there. And that is pretty much it here. The Maestro fight is a bit more special. The first thing that you probably want to learn before you actually tackle Labyrinth is how to evade his level 1. Because his level 1 can be tricky, and even if you block it, you're gonna get a degen on you, and the degen's gonna hurt a lot. In order to learn Maestro's evade, obviously some videos will help, but what helped me when I was learning it, to think of it about the same as Miles Morales level 1. But you do have 2 relatively quick evades, then you wait a slight moment, and then evade the 3rd time, the last beam. And that's about it. If you can push him to level 2, because you can simply outrange that, and it'll be fairly straightforward there. The one class that you definitely want to avoid using against him typically is Mystic, because he can apply poison on you, power lock, and a plethora of different debuffs, and Mystic is just a class that you should avoid whenever it comes to dealing with Maestro. Now, when it comes to other 5 classes, there are champions that are perfectly viable against him. I think Cosmic arguably has the easiest time, because only thing that Maestro does is nullifies your buffs on special attacks, but you trigger dexterity evading his special attack, so only thing he ends up doing is nullifying the dexterity buff, which is kind of like stupid, silly interaction that somebody at Kabam surely just didn't realize is going to happen. So Cosmics basically have absolutely no drawback. Second best class to use is Mutants, because Mutants also have a very, very straightforward fight there. Whenever you hit his block, you get power drained. So if you do not hit his block, it's all good. And yeah, he can get an armor up buff, but that's not that important. And then the rest of the classes have some more significant drawbacks. Using Science, he can shrug off debuffs, but again, keep in mind, this shrug off ability doesn't work on newer debuffs, such as, let's say, Slow, for instance. But yes, you don't ideally want to use Science champions in most cases. I believe there aren't too many great Science options for Labyrinth Maestro fight anyways. Skill reduces opponent effect accuracy when attacked, so basically skill champions are not the greatest against Maestro, with the exception of Aegon, because Aegon doesn't really need his ability accuracy. But for instance, if you try to use Nick Fury against Maestro, you will not inflict any bleed on him ever, because your ability accuracy is reduced whilst you're attacking. But I'm sure there are some options that can deal with that fight. And Tech Champion is kind of like the roulette, because he gains random buffs and some of them don't matter much. And some of them can be regeneration that's almost impossible to outdamage. And you just need to quit out, otherwise he's going to heal back to full. And some of those buffs can be power gain buffs that can make that fight extremely fast-paced and tricky. But in general, yeah, ideally you want to use a Cosmic or a Mutant champion against Maestro, and keep that in mind. There are obviously options in Tech, Skill, and Science classes, but they will not be as amazing in most of the situations. And that is pretty much it. This video is longer than I intended it to be, but these are the things that you need to be aware of when fighting these enigmatic Labyrinth of Legends champions. Again, I'm going to leave a link to this map here so you can refer to it as and when you please. A lot of people have used this map to plan their runs in the past as well. And yeah, I think that is about it for today. I already kept you guys here a bit too long. But I hope at the very least a couple of you find this video useful. And if you did, please do hit that like button, hit that sub button. And I'll catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about